States derive their power from their monopoly on territory. But what happens beyond 12 nautical miles from shore, where passport controls, visa regimes, and government jurisdiction simply does not apply? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hey, welcome back to Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast network. Great to have you with me for another show. Really excited for today's topic, something a little bit new. We're going to be talking about seasteading. I shouldn't say new because I have had on in the past some different versions of seasteading. I think this one today, with my guest Mitchell Suchner, who I'll introduce in a moment, is unique from the other ones though, and that was I think probably 2-3 years ago that we last talked about seasteading. Before we get to that though, I do need to tell you about the sponsor for today's show, Jason Gonyea and his Good to Go 90-day workout program. Jason, of course, if you're a listener, was my guest on last week's show, and he did an extensive overview of the program. So if you missed that, just go back and listen to it. But I can tell you this: if you're someone who has failed before with a workout program, if you failed to stay consistent and it didn't work for you, that's because it probably wasn't designed for you and probably wasn't designed to build you up from the basics and give you a strong foundation to build upon and find success. And that is what you will find with Jason's 90-day program. You can save $100 off of this 90-day program. Just use the link wherever you're watching or listening to this. Just copy and paste it, and the $100 off will be built in. All right, go check that out. And let's bring in today's guest, Mitchell Suchner. And Mitchell is the director of Arkpad. It's a seasteading company that has already deployed operational floating structures. So he has a resort, a fish farm, residential housing. This is in the Philippines. And his mission, pretty straightforward, to build the infrastructure for voluntary communities in international waters, of course, beyond the reach of any state. Mitchell, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the intro, and thank you for having me today. I'm happy to be connecting with you from my floating house out here.
Yeah, yeah. If you're watching on YouTube or Rumble or Spotify video, you can see in the background there, Mitchell is actually out on one of his floating seastead out there in the middle of the ocean, which is pretty awesome. Practicing what he preaches. And I mean, the first question that pops up for me is I talked about in the intro there. We've talked about seasteading a little bit on this show, and what I'm curious about is how did you end up here? What kind of is your origin story of how you ended up today speaking with you right now. You're in the middle of the ocean on a floating resort.
I mean, so that's a good question. How I ended up here is by believing in a certain idea that led to me taking actions to me getting here, right? It's more a question of like, why are you in the ocean rather than how. I
Hmm.
mean, you can ask the question, how did I get here? Well, I got here on a boat, of course. That's how I came here earlier today. But the question is, why are you out there? Why did people leave Europe in the 16 and 1700s to go to the New World? Why did people go out west when there were no cities, there were no colonies, during the Wild West era? It's because they wanted to do something new. They wanted to go to a new frontier. And a lot of the reason for that is because you find the most freedom in society at the frontiers, at the
Mm.
peripheries of what's going on, where rules have not yet been established. Now, I believe, from my perspective, I'm kind of an anarcho-capitalist, right? I want to see a society get established that never builds a state. Ideally, that's what I want to see from seasteading. But at the very least, you can say that if you went seasteading today, there are no. I won't say that there's no government regulation, but it's all governed by like flagging laws, which is a really complicated thing that I'd have to get into. But really, I'm here because of libertarian principles. That's the long and short of it.
Mhm. And living out those libertarian principles, you didn't just, start a podcast or complain about the government on X. You actually, put things in action, and, um, you're actually living on it right now. So tell us a little bit about just what you have built right now, resort, fish farm, houses. What is operational right now?
So right now, I am in the Reef Resort. We call this the Reef Resort. Can if I on YouTube, they'll see it if I turn the camera
Mhm.
around, won't they? So
Yeah.
I'll do a little spin around here for those of you that have video. So you can see there's a few houses. I'm in the little kitchen area here. We call this the refreshments area. We got a menu behind me, and most importantly, I can see you see that little speck of light way in the distance
Oh,
right there.
yeah. I can see it.
That's the city. That's like 10 miles away. So
Wow.
we're way out here. There's actually another island that's less than a kilometer away, just off the corner. You can't see it, but the main center of commerce is way out here. We have a great view in the morning when the sun comes up. So we got 14 floating houses. They're all on Airbnb. We've got 5 fish cages. These are very, very large cages that actually go underneath the housing, and they each contain about 20 to 30,000 fish. The amount of fish that we produce in a single harvest here in this resort can feed about 10 times the number of people that it can actually house. So, some countries, if you can compare this to a country, they have to import food. Like China has to import food to feed its
Mhm.
population. If we were to declare independence today and declare ourselves a seasteading country, we would be a net exporter of food, just in our
Mm.
our current state. Which you can't say that a lot about a lot of small projects, I think.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, I wasn't aware it was that amount of fish. So what's the setup with with the netting? How are you able to get that many fish?
So, I mean, the amount of fish that you can grow in a fish cage depends on the volume, right? So, if you have a cage that's like 5 meters in diameter and
Mhm.
it's like 8 meters deep, let's say that it can hold 2,000 fish. You go from a 5 meter diameter to a 15-meter diameter, and you only make it 10 meters deep. And because you increase the diameter, the surface area is increased by the square law, but the volume of a container increases by the measurement cubed, right? So the bigger of a cage that you make, it doesn't go up linearly; it goes up exponentially. So all you have to
Mm.
do is really just make big cages, and they can fit instead of 2,000 or 5,000, you can fit 30 or 40,000 fish. And I mean that's it. It's a pretty low tech thing. There are other things that we do that make the system a lot more efficient. Uh, we have we actually have a two cage system. So one cage sits in the middle. It grows milkfish, which is just a standard fish that's grown in the Philippines and is always on the market. We have another larger cage that wraps around the smaller cage. This is one of the things that we do that are different from the main aquaculture, the main fish farms in this part of the world. The bigger cage actually holds a thing called a rabbit fish. We put 30,000 rabbit fish in the bigger cage. The rabbit fish eat the waste of the milkfish, and they eat the algae that grows on all of the nets. So the whole system becomes self-cleaning and
Mm.
self-recycling, where you feed the milkfish and their waste feeds the rabbit fish, and the algae that grows in the whole thing also feeds the rabbit fish. You have less labor required to clean the system, and you get double the fish. That's one of the things that we do differently here.
Really interesting. And what I mean, how long have you had the resort operational for?
So we technically did our soft opening. Um, it'll have been exactly 1 year ago next week. So we've been open for less than a year, but the soft opening was for influencers. We had a bunch of well, it's Asia, so we had a bunch of Instagram models and
Mhm.
travel vloggers and YouTubers and people like that that reached out to us when we talked about what we were building. They wanted to come and stay. So what we did is we actually opened early last July to let these people come in and make social media content about the resort. Then we opened for regular tourism in September. So technically we opened in July, but really we opened basically 9 months ago.
Okay, like, what type of, like, clientele? Are you seeing people travel from across the world to come there, or is it more localized people traveling?
About 80% of people coming come from this city right here behind me. This is called Davao
Mm,
City, and this is I believe, the third largest city in the Philippines. So it's a major commercial hub, and they make up the bulk of the guests. Um, these rooms are not actually floating houses are surprisingly they're not that expensive to build. The thing about seasteading is that it gives you a new perspective on the nature of real estate. So most real estate prices come from location, they come from land, they come from,
mhm.
I'm sure that it's propped up by things like zoning laws and whatnot. But the actual cost to build one floating house, which is a studio unit, yeah, 14 of our 15 rooms are studio units. It only costs about $50,000 to build a floating house, and it'll last, 30, 40, 50 years with maintenance.
Really?
Um, yeah. It's very cost effective, so we can make it so cheap. We give a bunch of discounts, especially on weekends and things like that, so we're booked solid every weekend for, like, $50 a night. If you wanna spend $50 a night, you can come and stay here.
That's wild. So let's talk a little bit about the engineering. So in reading about it and watching the video on YouTube, I saw floating concrete talked about. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, I have a guest from Africa here right now, and I was just talking with him about the floating concrete a few hours
Mhm.
ago. Okay, so let me tell you about floating concrete. This is the interesting thing, is they do have floating concrete, and we did try to work with it back in 2023. But what a lot of people don't know is crabs can actually burrow into concrete.
Interesting.
They're strong enough to dig through concrete. So what'll happen is they can swim too. They'll swim straight up from the seafloor. They'll grab onto a concrete block if it's floating at the surface, and they'll dig a hole into it and make their burrow there. And so you'll end up with a whole bunch of crab holes all through your structure, and it's no longer structurally sound, and it becomes unsafe. I knew a guy in Singapore who built something like this, and eventually it sank. There was no people on it. Um, but the thing is, you can actually mitigate this. You can take these little copper needles that you can buy from China, and this sounds like animal abuse. You can mix them into the cement, and when the crabs try to burrow in and they reach the copper needles, they'll basically just shred their claws and they'll stop digging. And so you can crab proof your concrete that way.
That's crazy. Wow. So you were saying that these floating structures can last, I think you said 30 more years. And they're engineered, I think, to sustain waves of what, like 7 meters or something like that. Is that right?
Right. So let me explain now. I'll get away from the floating concrete. We don't use
Hmm.
floating.
Okay.
It's not bad, but we don't use it. We primarily use fiberglass and stainless steel. Everything we build is made out of fiberglass and stainless steel. There are two different types of seasteads that we have built and deployed in the ocean. The first one is called the Glamp House. So this is your typical barge style. It's basically just big fiberglass tanks with like aluminum floor joists or beams connecting the tanks, and then you
Mhm.
slap a house on top. The first houses that we put on top were basically big glamping tents with insulation and air conditioning. The technology wasn't the glamping tent. The technology was the fiberglass container down below and then multiple different chambers inside of it that kept it floating. So that's the one that's like $50,000 to build, and it'll last you reasonably at least 30 years. It'll go for like 30 years with functionally no maintenance because, when you build a boat, people always say, and I've said this to people before, if you spend $1 million on a yacht, you're going to spend another $1 million a year in maintenance because yachts are really expensive. The way that we build, we've completely flipped the script. So we build everything to be passive systems. The anti-flooding is a passive system. There's no engine. Our electricity is all solar. So the maintenance cost and the general operational cost is like $500 a year on one of these glamp houses, these really cheap floating houses. It's probably less than what a lot of people spend on their house on land. So that's the Glamp House, and those
Mhm.
can handle waves that are easily 1 meter or 2 meters tall. And that's what I'm staying in tonight. Now, the other one is called the Ark Pad, which is the namesake of the company. This thing, I show a picture on screen that the people listening can't see it, so I'll just describe it. Imagine an oil rig. And you take an oil rig, which some people think that oil rigs are fixed to the ground. They're actually floating. So you know those big columns that oil rigs have, where the columns go down into the water.
Mhm.
Those are like big hollow cylinders. About half of it's underwater and half of it's above the water. So it's actually free floating, and you can move it around from place to place. Oil rigs just float around, they're like tethered to the seafloor. If you scale that down to the size of a single house, like a two-bedroom, family home, and you make it out of entirely fiberglass, and you just use stainless bolts to bolt together. Those columns are called spars. So you bolt all the spars to the top deck and the bottom deck. You use these stainless bolts to bolt that. That's the Ark Pad. And those, because they're built with this oil rig design, those are the ones that can handle 6 or 7 meter waves. And our estimated lifespan, and of course they haven't lived this long, but how long we believe they will go with little to no maintenance is about 95 years.
Holy crap. Wow. So for you, when you think of like, I have a past in risk management, so I have a tendency to think of like worst case scenarios. Yeah, when you think of major storms coming through, what are the heights of waves that you could encounter in a major storm? Are you engineered to sustain and mitigate the worst case scenario? Really?
Mhm. That's a good question. So the worst case scenario is basically a hurricane.
Hmm.
And actually, the first Ark Pad that we built is near a place called Boracay Island, and it's been through two hurricanes already. So we specifically designed them to go through hurricanes. But there's a caveat. It can go through like a Cat 1 or a Cat 2, and it will survive. It's not really gonna go through a Cat 4 or Cat 5 in open sea conditions. That would destroy,
Hmm.
this type of structure. So you do have to be conscious about where you put it. If you put it right off the coast of Florida with 0 protection,
Yeah.
you could be in for a bad time. But with going back to seasteading as like a political, like ANCAP kind of ideology, there are maps you can find online that show you the best places to seastead. Now, the first group of best places for placing these floating houses is protected gulfs and bays and lagoons and things like that where you don't need to worry about a storm, but those are all surrounded by land. So if you know anything about seasteading, you know that if you're too close to land, you're not in international waters, which
Hmm.
means you don't have the benefit of the thing. The other areas where you can put these floating houses is at the equator, because at the equator there are no hurricanes. They can't form there.
Mm.
And better yet, there are these circular currents that go around and around and around and stay in the equatorial region. These are called gyres. So if you can imagine, you take a small oil rig type structure with a house on it, an arc pad, you put it in one of these gyres and it goes around and around in this equatorial region where you never get any hurricanes. It can survive there, ideally, for the entire 95 years. Now, we haven't tried this yet, but this is what we want to do.
Very cool. Very cool. So for the listeners and people watching out there, probably like me, they're wondering, somebody's staying on your resort. They stay for a weekend or they stay for 4 or 5 days. What is a day on the resort look like?
Honestly, it's mostly just people chilling. They're just
Yeah.
taking pictures. There's like a volcano on the other side of the Gulf, and you can see it over the horizon. So they're just taking pictures of the volcano. They're paddling on the kayaks. We have like a glass kayak so you can see below you, and they'll paddle over the coral reef and stuff like that. It's typical vacation stuff. It's basically like we invented this technology for a libertarian lifestyle, and then we tried to commercialize it so that it can make a profit and stand on its own 2 feet, and it's worked. We fit well into the tourism market that's pre-existing in Asia, in the Philippines, and that's great. But honestly, I can't say that there's that much about it. Maybe it's because I've been out here for so long, but there's not that much about it that's interesting. You're
You're
just
not doing a good job selling it. Just kidding.
well, what can I say? It's a safe house.
Yeah.
It's a house. It's safe. It has a great view. It's got, great reefs. We have a restaurant here. We have lots of amenities. We've got jet skis. We've got scuba diving. You actually put on your scuba diving kit, and you can just jump off your balcony and go straight down and scuba dive underneath the house, which is fun.
Mhm.
Of course, when you've done it 3 times already, it's less exciting because I've done it a few times. But if you've never been on a seastead, you should definitely come.
Yeah. It's just amazing to me, how fast technology has evolved, and to think, like, if I could imagine, you know, 20 years ago that I'd be talking to you sitting in the middle of the ocean. You're on Starlink, which didn't even exist then. Just had to kinda check myself there for a minute, just kinda remind ourselves how fast technology evolves to kinda think, like, to the future, which we'll get to talking about the future, your vision for Arkpad in a bit here, but, um, it's just amazing how quickly things can move in this world, which is always fantastic to think about. Um, so to kind of pivot, you were talking about, libertarianism and how the resort kind of fits in the commercial end of it. You can kind of experience it for a little bit, but ultimately, isn't one of the goals of ArkPad to, create a place where people can live pretty much year round, free of the state and taxes and all of those things?
Yes, exactly. And, a lot of people tell you this, you have to walk before you can run. So we basically laid out a roadmap and we said, okay, what does it look like? You'll, when I, sorry, I like to ramble sometimes.
No, go for it.
When
Ramble away.
we Sure. When I first got into seasteading, it was around 2020. It was when the lockdowns happened. The government imposed these lockdowns. I was stuck inside. I was going through YouTube videos in my spare time because I was bored. And I found out about this floating house that had been built off the coast of Thailand. And it was called Seasteading. And the guy that was advocating for it, he's a great guy. I know him now. His name is Chad L. Wartowski. He was the guy that built it. What actually happened was he built this floating house, brought it 13 miles off the coast, declared independence and that it was going to be a new country. It was off the coast of Thailand, and the Thai Navy declared that he had committed a capital crime. He was going to be given the death penalty,
Mm,
and the Navy attacked the floating house, and he had to get on a speedboat, and he was chased by the Navy hundreds of nautical miles south. He had to cross through Thailand, through Malaysia, and get to Singapore, where he loaded onto another guy's boat where they couldn't find him. And
wow.
that, and that story was so interesting to me that that's how I got into seasteading. The first thing I did is I went online. I started looking up where are the other seasteading projects. What are other people doing? It. A lot of people have the same idea, which is I'm going to build a single floating house and I'm going to declare my own country, and that's it, and then it'll be independent. And the real world doesn't work that way. You have to start with something that's manageable. You have to start with a minimum viable product. We said, let's build 15 or 16 of them. Let's rent them out on Airbnb. And the best part of it is the government won't blow it up. And so far, they haven't. And once we, have tested the waters, so to speak, we've been through hurricanes, we've got a lot of additional funding coming in and new investors. Then we'll take one of the big ones, the Ark Pads that I mentioned. It looks like the big oil rigs. We'll float that one out into international waters, and we'll just send it out on like a fishing trip. or something like that, with the intention that we're going to send another boat to grab it and like tow it back inland later on. And you have to do this in stages. You can't just
Mm.
say like next week I'm going to declare my own country. Again, it doesn't work like that. Prospera, you're familiar with Prospera, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Prospera, it took 12 years for them to negotiate their independence from the Honduran government. I know the guys over at Prospera too, and that's great and that's extremely admirable. But with seasteading, you could have a shorter route to a better guarantee of independence, right? I don't think it took us 2 years to build this floating resort. I think in another 2 years we could already be in international waters. That's pretty quick. That's quick as far as I'm concerned. And best of all, once you're in international waters, you don't need to worry about the Honduran government holding an election and your guy losing and them repealing the law or changing the constitution to get rid of you, like Prospera
Mhm.
has to worry about. And that's not to diss them. I love those guys, but they've had problems and close calls with elections before in the past, and we see how that works out. Seasteading is the ultimate form of freedom because there is no governing body that you're negotiating with for your independence. You are independent by default, and as long as you can get neighboring countries to agree not to attack you, you'll stay independent. The only tricky part is making sure that they don't attack you, which they didn't pull off in Thailand.
Mhm. So what type of individual, do you think seasteading is appealing to? Obviously, it's this freedom-minded, libertarian, type of individual, but like, uh do they need to be super wealthy in order to do this?
No. Like I mentioned, the studio units, they aren't really meant for deep sea use. Maybe they could survive at the equator, maybe. The jury's out on that. The Glamp House units, they're $50,000. Compare that to any real estate in America. That is
Mhm.
absurdly cheap. So you don't need to be rich to seastead. You can buy one of these things, you can move on to it. You probably want a remote job so you can work online or some kind of a passive income or a pension or something, but we've got restaurants, we've got all this stuff. When we move out to the equator, we'll bring those things with us. So there'll be infrastructure. Um, but the bigger ones that are really meant for open sea conditions, those are probably going to be in the range of about 250 to $300,000, which is about the same cost as a regular house in like Iowa or Kentucky, and less than half the cost of housing in California. So if you can afford half a house in California, you can afford a seastead. So no, it doesn't have to be rich people. I think anyone who's liberty minded is capable of seasteading. And I think that they should seastead because the more that people do it, the more legitimized it will be, the more that the infrastructure for these floating cities will get quickly built up. It's the networking effect. You have to build a critical mass. So go to seasteading.org, find one of these groups they're already online, like Telegram groups and Discord groups forming of people that want to go populate the first floating city as soon as it shows up. Join one of these groups and get involved is what I would say. So that's the first group of people, is the pioneers, the
Mhm.
libertarians. They're the people that seasteading is for right now. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, I believe that the first seasteading cities they're going to become a lot like what Singapore was when it was growing. Singapore was a small island off the coast of Malaysia. It actually got kicked out of Malaysia right after Malaysia declared independence, and Malaysia actually forced the island to become its own country because they didn't want it, which
Hmm.
is crazy. It's one of the it's like our dream, and it was given to them for free, right? And so what happened was they had a brief period where they considered going socialist, and then they decided, let's try out capitalism instead. And they cut taxes, they cut regulations, they allowed foreign investment, they allowed free trade and all this stuff. And Singapore today is like per capita, it's one of the richest countries in the world. And its population absolutely exploded. And it didn't explode from natural births, it exploded from immigration. You had Malaysians, you had Chinese, you had Indians, really just people from poor countries moved into Singapore because there were jobs. So sometimes people wonder, why would you choose to live in the middle of the ocean? unless you're like a crazy libertarian that wants to get away from it all. And the answer is after the crazy libertarians show up and stake their claim, it's inevitably going to be followed as long as they, practice free market politics. Those floating cities will become wealthy enough that they will inevitably draw in large numbers of migrants from poor and developing countries. And that's also one of the reasons that I'm happy right now that we're stationed right off the coast of Philippines, because it is one of these developing countries. 60% of the population speaks English. It's going to be a good fit one day for the type of immigration that I think seasteads want to attract.
Absolutely. So with that being said, kind of looking towards the future, you've kind of laid out, the pioneers, and then who will come on after it becomes, socially acceptable and economically acceptable, and gains momentum. Um, what do you think overall with kind of looking at it and zooming out, and looking at seasteading from a, from the 10,000 foot view? What do you think the biggest obstacle is going forward? Is it like just the engineering of being able to build everything? Is it,
No,
the legal challenges? Is it is it a country trying to attack you and stop you? Is it the financial aspect of it? Is it something else?
I think that the engineering has, and I'll put an asterisk next to this, so take this with a grain of salt, but the engineering has mostly been solved. The guys I mentioned in Thailand, they built 13 miles off the coast. They ended up setting up another company in Panama and built even bigger floating houses that are also off the coast of Panama now. And now they're looking at doing the same thing in the Maldives, I've heard recently. So they have the technology. We have the technology to go hundreds of miles offshore. The technology is here. The engineering is here. I'm not worried about the actual tech itself. It's there and it's affordable for the average American. And if you can live in a studio unit, it's affordable for just about anybody. But uh, what are the roadblocks? I guess the first one is probably the funding. We do need to get some funding. That's true. But I think that, well, I won't go into that now, but I think that the funding is there. I think that there are groups that want to fund charter cities. There are just general real estate sales. We sell ownership in these
Mhm.
floating houses here. So if you want to support us in building more floating houses, go on our website, reefresort.co. Just buy up some ownership, and then when we rent the units out, we're going to pay you back for those. So there's a shameless plug, and you know, whether you're selling something, whether you're getting foreign investment, I think the funding will show up there. Then there's the legal element. The legal element is really, really interesting. Um, so can I talk about flagging laws for a second?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So now I get into the thing that makes seasteading fundamentally different from every other type of libertarianism. Um, with, let's say, for example, we're going to talk about a cruise ship. When you have a cruise ship passing through international waters, the laws on board the cruise ship are the laws of whatever flag the cruise ship is flying.
Mm,
So if it's flying the flag of Panama, the laws that it's enforcing are the laws of Panama. However, there are no Panamanian police on board, and there's no requirement to have any. So the laws are enforced by the captain of the ship. Now, of course, if you had 100 of these ships and they were all traveling in a group together and everybody is the captain of his own ship and they're all flying the flag of Panama, then every owner of his household is expected to be his own police and enforce his own laws on guests who come into your home or whatever, right? So basically, as long as you own your own house, you're the police, you're the judge, you're the governor, whatever, right? There's really
mhm.
nobody there to enforce laws except for you. So that's the first thing is enforcement. Seasteading gives you the advantage of I'm the one that enforces these laws, and if I don't want a law to be enforced, then you just don't enforce it. The other thing is you can switch flags. So instead of flying the flag of Panama, you could fly the flag of Liberia, or some ships fly the flag of Mongolia, which doesn't have any access to the sea. So the thing about Mongolia is, I've never even heard of them checking in to see if a law was ever enforced. They're one of these countries that it's like they'll just take like $300 a year from you to fly their flag, and then they'll block your number. Like they don't want to hear from you. They want nothing to do with you. So so you can kind of just do whatever you want. You want to practice polycentric law, you want to do a network state, you want to do this or that or the other thing. You fly the Mongolian flag, and then you can do whatever you want. Now, keep in mind, you can't make port because no country will let you into their port if you're flying the Mongolian flag because they don't take that flag seriously. But it is an option. And if you have no intention of going to land, then I guess it's a valid option.
Hmm.
Um, but another thing is if you want to use flags a bit more legitimately, you can imagine a scenario like this. Let's say I wanted to build a special economic zone where weed was legal and it had favorable cryptocurrency regulations. So I would take three floating houses, connect them all together. One of them, I'm going to fly, let's say, the Singapore flag because it has really good, taxes and regulations and things like that, and access to banks. So I can register a company on board that floating house, and it's legally registered in Singapore. So now you can access the banking system. Then you have another flag, which is the Netherlands, and now you have your weed. And then you have another flag, which is what's a country that's really good for crypto? Argentina, maybe, right? So all I have to do is walk from this house to that house and back and forth, and I can choose my laws based on where I'm at. And so if a company owned all three of those, then they could have like a weed coffee shop and a crypto exchange and still have access to the central banking system or the international banking system.
It's
And
really
so
a shrinking down of the global economy and just picking and choosing, what aspects you want.
yeah,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, it's almost like, I mean, you've heard of polycentric law where you kind of choose your own laws, right?
Mhm,
This whole flagging thing can almost be thought of as like another form of libertarianism in and of itself. It's like a choose your own flag and choose your own enforcement type deal, which is interesting on its own. It's
mhm.
kind of custom made for libertarians. I think that the whole way that it's implemented in international waters is just it's like a cookie cutter version of what some far right anarcho-capitalist could have thought up in a fever dream. It's like this is the actual international law. Now, of course, in reality, it's never practiced this way because nobody's doing seasteading right now. In reality, one cruise ship with 2,000 people on it is flying one flag, and it's the flag of Panama, and the captain is doing the best to his best to enforce the laws of Panama. They're not trying to push boundaries like some people could do, but the capacity is there, the
Yeah.
possibility is there.
So the next frontier, the pioneers who push those boundaries, yeah, that'll be, I mean, it's a frontier for a reason. It's something that's never been tried before, but I was gonna say it's interesting thought experiment, but it's more than a thought experiment. It's something that is tangible in the near
Yeah, it's
term,
real.
right? Yeah. Mhm,
You could do if you had $1,000,000, you could do it by the end of the year.
mhm. Which a lot of
But
people
I
have
say a
a
million.
lot of people have $1,000,000, so maybe maybe we'll
Yeah,
see it, yeah.
yeah. Hopefully,
Alright.
I'd love to partner up with somebody and make that happen. We're taking it slow and steady, but if somebody wants to come along and push us over the finish line, we're certainly willing to cooperate.
Mhm. Um, okay, so yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad you brought up, flagging laws, because that's something I really hadn't thought about. You talked a little bit about, like, your current plan of how you're you've built out the resort and then, kind of testing the waters from there, as to say, I guess, figuratively and literally
Mhm.
for your next moves. But when you look forward 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, um, what do you see? And I know things can change and, there's different dynamics that influence, kind of decisions you make. But if you just had to kind of cast a vision for what you see in the next 2, 5, 10 years, what do you see for Arkpad?
For 2 years out, I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that we will make it out beyond the boundary of territorial waters, and that we will attempt some small project related to some real, libertarian seasteading principles. For 5 years, I'm confident that we will. I'm confident that we'll be in international waters 5 years from now. I think that's going to happen. I wouldn't stake my life on it. Things can always change, but I think it's very feasible. For 10 years, I don't know.
Mhm.
And no one really knows. 10 years from now, the United Nations could have banned seasteading, or you could have your first, population 10,000 seastead. Who
Yeah.
knows in 10 years? That's a that's an eternity. But, another project that I think is really interesting is, the Seasteading Institute. They actually have a project to create their own flag. So they're trying to create a seasteading flag, and by creating a seasteading flag, it would be an even more flexible version where instead of flying the Panama flag and the Netherlands flag and the Singapore flag, what the Seasteading Institute wants to do, and maybe in 5 years we'll see this, is they have one flag which is meant for seasteads and one set of regulations that are also meant for seasteads. And seasteads can just go and fly this flag. And if they could achieve that, it would not only allow every seastead to basically pick its own laws and its own enforcement of those laws and so on and so forth, but it would legitimize seasteading in front of the United Nations in a way that the shell game with flags would probably not do.
Mm.
This shell game is maybe a good option in the short term, but long term, I think that there needs to be a seasteading flag. And I would hope you're saying, what do I see in 10 years? I would hope that in 10 years there will be seasteads and they'll have their own dedicated flag. And then you don't really have a country so much, but you have a kind of an ethereal, it's like a state of anarchy in the sea, but it's like it's got its own flag is what
Right.
I can say. And it would maximize freedom in that way.
Pretty amazing to think about, really, put in that context. So people who are listening, watching today, how can they get involved? If they're wanting to learn more, if they're wanting to visit the resort, if they're wanting to become involved from a monetary standpoint, where should they go?
If you're visiting the Philippines, come and stay here. Go to Davao City and look up Samol Reef Resort on Facebook. Most Filipinos use Facebook, so we're most active on Facebook. You can shoot us a message or you can go to our website. It's reefresort.co. On the website, you can either buy ownership in these floating houses or you can book a stay or you can, do whatever you want. Come out here, come visit, come see what seasteading is all about. Live on the ocean. It's even fun during the storms. I can attest to that. Some people, some ladies come out here and stay. Women during the storms, they tend to get a bit, But for me personally, I'll say I love the storms. They're really fun. So if you're coming with your wife, don't tell her that there's going to be potential storms. But it is safe. It is safe. I can promise that. But if you're not planning on going to the Philippines, uh, you know, just go online and get involved that way. Look up the Seasteading Institute, research the history of seasteading. People have been doing stuff similar to this since like the 1960s. Um, there's so much more to it than just what I can fit in this little 45-minute blurb. It's been a movement for decades, and it's going to be a bigger movement in the coming decades.
All right. Well, Michael, thank you for taking time out here in the middle of the night here on your floating resort in the Philippines to join Finding Freedom and talk to my audience. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, Sean.
All right, guys, that is a wrap for today's show. As always, if you like what we do here on Lions of Liberty on Finding Freedom, please subscribe, rate, review, and if you really like what we're doing, come join us, become a patron, find us on Patreon or locals, and join up. And with that being said, keep on going, and I'll see you next week with another awesome interview.